Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the strangest corners of medieval life. The weird, wonderful, and occasionally gross world of pregnancy testing. Picture yourself standing in a stone cottage that smells faintly of herbs, smoke, and wet wool. Outside, a rooster cries under the grey dawn. Inside, a midwife leans over a bowl of wheat and barley seeds, and she's about to ask you to, well, add a personal touch. You probably won't survive this century, but at least you'll go down in history as part of one of humanity's oddest experiments. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fire crackles low as you shuffle closer to the midwife. She's muttering about fertility spirits, her voice half prayer, half gossip. On the rough wooden table sit two small cloth bundles, one filled with wheat grains, the other with barley. Each is carefully spread in its own little earthen bowl. The test, she says, never lies. You don't dare ask how she knows. According to ancient Egyptian texts, yes. Even they did this long before the medieval folks caught on. A pregnant woman's urine was believed to make seeds sprout faster. If barley sprouted first, she was carrying a boy. If wheat did, a girl. And if nothing sprouted, the verdict was clear: no child on the way. The medieval midwives adopted this logic wholeheartedly, blending superstition with botany and a healthy dose of hope. You bend down and watch as she pours the liquid over the grains. It's oddly reverent, like watering a tiny garden of secrets. Then comes the waiting. Hours pass, sometimes days. The smell of damp earth mingles with the smoke, and the midwife insists the sprouts will tell all. See how they reach for light, she whispers. It's the soul of the babe calling out. It's half touching, half ridiculous. But here's the surprising part. Modern science has actually confirmed that this test sometimes worked. Researchers found that the hormones in early pregnancy, especially estrogen, can encourage certain seed growth. Not perfectly, but enough to make you raise an eyebrow. So yes, that medieval midwife with the patched cloak and iron patience might have been onto something. Though historians still argue whether she truly understood why it worked, or if she just got lucky. As you lean on the rough table, you can almost feel the slow rhythm of time itself. No rush, no sterile laboratories, just women waiting together, whispering hopes over bowls of grain. The candlelight flickers across faces lined by years of toil and worry. You imagine how sacred this moment must have felt, a test, but also a ritual of sisterhood. Then again, not every test ended peacefully. Some impatient husbands demanded answers overnight. You can picture them bursting in, muddy boots, fur cloaks still damp from the rain, insisting that their wives be examined immediately. The poor midwife would protest. The seeds need time. But medieval patience wasn't exactly famous. A local legend from northern France tells of a lord who ordered his servants to set bowls near the hearth to force the sprouts. They did, and the next morning found nothing but dry dust and regret. The wife wasn't pregnant, but the story says the Lord insisted she must be cursed. So, naturally, the poor woman was sent to confession instead of the doctor. That's the strange mix of logic and faith that defined this era. Everything was proof of something. But what exactly depended on who was watching? You shuffle back from the fire and glance at the window. Outside, frost creeps across the glass, forming tiny branching patterns that look suspiciously like sprouting grains. For a second, you wonder if nature itself is testing you too. Then the midwife hums. A slow tune that sounds older than the church bells. Barley first, she says with a knowing smile, pointing to the tiniest green shoot curling up through the soil. A boy. Strong. Loud lungs. She speaks with confidence only centuries of repetition could forge. You nod, though a part of you suspects she'd say the same no matter which seed sprouted first. That's the magic of the medieval mind. Certainty born from mystery. She tells you stories as she works, about women who came from miles away, some desperate for a sign, others just curious. One tale is of Lady Marjorie of Kent, who reportedly used her own grain garden every year just to keep gossips busy. Better they whisper about seeds, she'd say, than my husband's deaths. By now the fire's dying, and the midwife yawns. Let the earth decide, she murmurs. It knows the truth better than we do. You lie back on a straw mattress, the sound of wind curling around the cottage walls. Outside, the moon glows faintly like a silver coin dropped in ink. Somewhere in that silence it hits you. The tenderness behind this odd ritual. These weren't just crude tests, they were acts of hope. When medicine couldn't explain, people turned to what they could see. The life in a sprout, the pattern of frost, the breath of a sleeping woman. You think of how strange it must have felt to pin your future to a handful of barley. And yet, even today, we do something similar, peeing on a stick and waiting for a faint line, heart-pounding. Maybe not so different after all. Still, the medieval mind craved spectacle. So, midwives began adding flourishes prayers to Saint Margaret, guardian of childbirth, charms whispered over bowls, sometimes a drop of candle wax to seal the blessing. Others added strange instructions. Don't touch the bowls during storms. Don't let cats near them. Cats were always suspected of mischief. If both grains sprouted, that meant twins. If they grew twisted together, the child was destined for greatness, or doom, depending on who you asked. A few alchemists, ever eager to complicate things, tried turning the urine into powder before pouring it, claiming it made results more divine. You can imagine the smell. Even medieval villagers complain. One chronicler from 13th century Flanders wrote that the vapors offended the angels. Probably true, and yet this test endured. It traveled from dusty cottages to noble manors, even finding mention in monastic texts. The church tolerated it, barely, because it seemed harmless, though priests sometimes warned it, tempted women to pry into God's secrets. But who could resist? Each green shoot was a whisper of possibility. As you drift toward sleep in that dim room, your imagination dances through centuries of repetition. Thousands of bowls, millions of seeds, and all the waiting hearts behind them. A sudden spark from the hearth pops and fades. The air smells of smoke and barley. You feel an odd connection to every woman who ever leaned over such a bowl, holding her breath for a sign. Maybe that's what keeps these old tests alive, the desire to know before the world does. You glance once more at the small green sprout, curling toward the candlelight like a secret trying to be born. Somewhere in its fragile stem lies both the absurdity and beauty of human curiosity. Tomorrow, the midwife will move on to the next village, carrying her bowls and her faith. And you? Well, you'll follow her shadow into the next story, where things get even stranger. Because the next medieval test, let's just say it's breathtaking. Literally. The fire burns low, and the smell of barley fades as you follow the midwife down a muddy lane. Dawn is a pale smear on the horizon, and the village is waking. Roosters crowing, dogs barking, chimney smoke rising in lazy ribbons. You're still half asleep when she stops beside a crooked stone hut and whispers, "This one's for the brave." You step inside. The air smells faintly of onions and candle wax, an odd combination that tells you this next test isn't going to be glamorous. On the table sits a basket of onions, fat and glossy, their skins shining like polished bronze. We call it the breath test. The midwife says with a grin, A woman sleeps with an onion between her legs. If she's pregnant, her mouth will smell sweet by morning. If she's not, well, everyone will know it. You blink. She's serious. The onion breath oracle was one of medieval Europe's strangest diagnostic tools. It sounds like a prank, but physicians of the 14th century swore by it. The idea was simple. If the scent of the onion traveled upward through the woman's body and reached her breath by dawn, her womb was open and unoccupied. But if no smell emerged, something was blocking the pathway, presumably a developing baby. You can't help but laugh quietly. So basically, you whisper, "If she doesn't stink, she's pregnant." The midwife chuckles.
Exactly.
Not the most romantic science, but effective. Sometimes, as you settle into a corner, she tells you about the test's origins. Ancient Greek physicians, especially Hippocrates, were the first to propose it, believing that the womb was connected to the mouth through invisible veins of breath. By the Middle Ages, this theory had become gospel. Monks copied it into medical texts, scholars taught it in universities, and midwives carried it into homes. Historians still argue whether it was ever truly practiced widely, or if it lived mostly on parchment as an academic curiosity. But written records show enough references to convince us that at least a few unlucky women tried it. Imagine lying in a drafty room, clutching an onion, praying for a sign, while your husband snores beside you. The midwife tells you one of her favorite stories about Lady Eleanor of York, who supposedly underwent the test before her wedding. Her maid claimed the room smelled so strongly of onions, the priest fainted at the ceremony. She wasn't pregnant, the midwife adds, but she did end up with 5 children later, so perhaps the onions blessed her after all. You picture that scene, a flickering candle, a nervous woman, a silent prayer that her breath smells of garlic, and not judgment. It's absurd and tender all at once. The midwife reaches into the basket and pulls out a small onion, its skin crackling. "Try holding it," she says. You obey, feeling the rough texture, the faint oil that clings to your fingertips. "Every herb, every root has its mystery," she murmurs. "Even the humblest bulb carries the power of truth." You nod, though part of you wonders how many truths were lost to superstition. But to them, this wasn't absurd. It was sacred observation. The body spoke in whispers, and every smell, sound, and symptom meant something. The flicker of the candle reflects in her eyes. She tells you that in some regions, women used not just onions, but garlic or leeks, depending on what was available. Garlic, she says, worked faster. One French scholar even claimed to measure how pure a woman's womb was by the strength of her onion breath. A rating system no one asked for, but someone definitely invented. And just when you think the story couldn't get any stranger, she leans closer. "There was a time," she says softly, "when men tried it too." You raise an eyebrow. "Oh yes," she laughs. "Certain husbands, eager to share the burden, would test themselves to see if they could smell the onion too. Proof," they said, "of their wife's honesty." She shakes her head. They learned nothing, except that onions don't lie. It's easy to mock, but as you listen, you realize these odd rituals were a kind of language. A way to understand mysteries without microscopes or hormones. When the unknown loomed large, people turned to the senses: touch, taste, smell, breath. And yet, not everyone agreed with the practice. Some church officials called it indecent. The womb, one monk wrote, is not a kitchen chimney. Others defended it as natural philosophy. Scholars debated it endlessly, with no consensus. Historians still argue whether these tests were more symbolic than medical. A conversation that feels oddly modern. You take a deep breath. The air in the hut is sharp now. The onion scent stings your eyes. The midwife fans the smoke from the candle. "The smell," she says, There's the body's language. Learn it, and you learn everything. You're not sure you want to. But still, there's something hypnotic about the idea that something as ordinary as a vegetable could hold such sway over fate. She starts humming again, a lilting tune that seems older than memory. The onion glows faintly in the candlelight, like a small planet in her hands. Many women found comfort in this, she says, even if it was foolish. It gave them a moment of control. A way to say I know before the world told them what to think. You think about that control. In a time when women had little voice, even a superstition could become empowerment. The onion test might have been silly, but it belonged to them. She tells you of one last legend. A healer from Florence who claimed she could predict not just pregnancy, but the temperament of the unborn child. If the onion scent lingered in the air long after dawn, she said, the child would be strong-willed. If it faded quickly, the baby would be gentle, the midwife chuckles. I suppose my own mother must have slept in a whole garden. Outside, a rooster crows again. Morning light spills through the window, catching motes of dust and steam. The midwife takes a deep breath, smiles, and snuffs out the candle. Test complete, she whispers. No smell. Congratulations, you're expecting. You stand there for a moment, torn between disbelief and awe. Somehow in this strange ritual of onions and breath, you can feel centuries of human longing. Our endless attempt to catch life's secrets in our hands. And as you step outside into the crisp air, the faint smell of onion still clinging to your clothes, you can't help but wonder what other tests people trusted back then. The midwife gestures for you to follow her once more. Next, she says, we meet the alchemists. They don't sniff onions, they boil things. Your stomach drops. Boil what exactly? She just smiles, eyes glinting. You'll see. You tighten your cloak and follow her through the morning mist, past the fields, and toward the sound of bubbling cauldrons. The next test isn't about seeds or breath. It's about transforming something humble into something divine. Or at least, pretending to. You follow the midwife through the damp morning air, the smell of onion fading as a new scent takes over. Something metallic, sour, and strangely sweet. Ahead lies a crooked timber workshop, its windows fogged by steam and smoke. The midwife pauses at the door, smirking. Welcome, she says, to the house of alchemy. Inside, you're greeted by chaos. Brass instruments clatter, glass flasks bubble with golden liquid, and scrolls covered in strange symbols lie scattered across every surface. The air is thick with smoke and ambition. At the center of it all stands a man in a suit, streaked robe, his beard stained yellow at the tips. He says, squinting through the haze, another seeker of truth. You nod cautiously, though the truth here smells suspiciously like boiled urine. This, the midwife whispers, is Master Henricus, a self-proclaimed physician and alchemist. His specialty, diagnosing pregnancy through the sacred art of pee analysis. He gestures proudly to a row of ceramic jars, each filled with fluids of varying shades. Observe, he declares. The elixir of life reveals all. Its color, its scent, its heat. These are the voices of creation. You edge closer. One jar glows faintly amber in the candlelight. Another has a film of oil across its surface. This one, he says, lifting it gently, belonged to a duchess. When heated over flame, it shimmered like gold, proof of royal blood. You glance at the midwife. She looks unimpressed. Proof of dehydration, she mutters. The man ignores her and continues. We alchemists, he says, red urine like others' red stars. A clear, pale color suggests emptiness of womb, a milky hue, potential for life. But when it shines like morning sunlight, he pauses dramatically. Then the womb sings. You stifle a laugh. So you're saying pregnancy glows? Indeed, he replies. And I can prove it. Watch. He takes a small copper pan, pours a sample into it, and sets it over the flame. The smell that rises is indescribable. Part vinegar, part death, with a hint of cabbage. The midwife coughs. Smells like sin. She mutters. Henricus inhales deeply, eyes fluttering closed in rapture. The aroma of revelation, he says. Only the trained nose perceives it. You try not to breathe. This was no parody. Urine analysis was an actual branch of medieval medicine, known as uroscopy. Physicians used glass flasks called matulus to inspect color and clarity. They believed every shade corresponded to a different bodily state, from melancholy to divine blessing. And while pregnancy wasn't their main focus, some believed they could detect it by subtle differences. Foaminess, thickness, warmth. Historians still argue, the midwife whispers, whether these alchemists truly found patterns or just enjoyed playing gods. Henricus, meanwhile, has begun his second act. He holds up a piece of parchment showing a diagram, 12 circles, each marked with a zodiac sign. You see, he says, Iran is ruled by the stars. A woman's sample collected under the moon of Libra foretells conception within days. But if taken under Scorpio, he lowers his voice. Beware of false signs. The midwife rolls her eyes. He blames Scorpio for everything. You have to admit, though, it's mesmerizing. His words are nonsense wrapped in poetry, half superstition, half science experiment. The flickering candles throw strange shadows across the walls. Shadows that look like twisting serpents, or maybe just your imagination reacting to the fumes. He continues, plunging a silver spoon into the bubbling sample. Behold! The color deepens! It speaks of transformation! He stirs slowly, eyes gleaming. Life within life! The liquid hisses, sending up a thin puff of smoke. You lean closer, curious despite yourself. So, if it bubbles, she's pregnant. Bubbles. He says solemnly, mean vitality. Flatness means despair. He peers into the pot as if expecting it to sing. Ah, yes, this one will bear twins, I think, because it foamed twice. You ask dryly. Exactly. The midwife snorts. Or because you stirred it twice, fool. Henricus frowns. Madam, mock not the mysteries of nature. It's almost comedic. The tension between old herbal wisdom and early alchemy, between intuition and pretension. Yet you can't help noticing that beneath the showmanship lies genuine curiosity. These men and women were fumbling towards science, blind but determined. You glance around the cluttered workshop, flasks, astrological charts, faded notes in Latin. One line catches your eye, Arena est speculum corporis. The urine is the mirror of the body. In its strange way, that's almost profound. The midwife whispers, they wanted control. To see the invisible. You nod. Maybe they weren't so different from modern scientists. Just armed with candles instead of centrifuges. Henricus begins preparing another test. This time, he adds crushed rosemary and a few drops of vinegar. This, he says proudly, is my improvement upon the method of Trotula. The name catches your attention. Trotula of Salerno, a real medieval physician. One of the few women whose medical texts survived. She studied women's health centuries before anyone else dared. Trotula advised warmth and color. Henricus says reverently, "But I have added scent!" If the mixture smells of spring herbs, life is forming. You suppress a grin. And if it smells like death, then perhaps it's just Wednesday. The midwife mutters. Henricus sniffs dramatically, then nods. Pregnant indeed. The midwife shakes her head. You'd say that if it turned purple. It did once, he insists. You can't decide if this man is brilliant or delusional, or maybe both. But in this smoky little workshop, surrounded by the stench of vinegar and ambition, you start to see how science was born. Trial and error, belief and disbelief. Curiosity burning hotter than the fire beneath that pan. He wipes his hands on his robe, turning to you. Would you like to test your own? Your eyes widen. Absolutely not. He laughs. Wise. Few are ready for such revelation. The midwife nudges you toward the door. Come on, she whispers. Before he starts measuring your aura. As you step outside, the cool air feels like a blessing. Behind you, the alchemist continues muttering to himself, stirring and sniffing, chasing secrets through the steam. You walk along the muddy road, your head still spinning from the fumes. Does any of that actually work? You ask. The midwife shrugs. Sometimes. Most times, no. But people trust what they can see or smell. She glances back toward the hut. And they'd rather believe in boiling magic than accept uncertainty. You think about it. Maybe that's the thread tying all these tests together. Not science, but hope. Hope dressed in ritual, disguised as certainty. The midwife smiles softly. Besides, she says, his fire keeps the village warm in winter. Let him dream. You both walk in silence for a while. The air smells cleaner now. Pine and frost instead of potions and fear. Birds sing from the trees. Then she looks ahead. Next, she says, we visit the women who test with warmth itself. No potions, no onions. Only touch and time. You raise an eyebrow. Sounds almost normal. She chuckles. Don't worry. It won't stay that way for long. The path winds through the forest toward a cluster of cottages. Smoke rises from their chimneys, and somewhere inside, another strange test awaits. One that listens not to smell or sight, but to the rhythm beneath your skin. The forest opens into a clearing, where smoke drifts lazily from the chimneys of a small cluster of cottages. The midwife's footsteps crunch softly on frost, crusted earth. This next test, she murmurs, is quieter than the rest. No seeds, no smell, no boiling pots. Only touch. You follow her toward one of the cottages, the door hanging slightly ajar. Warmth pours out, a relief against the chill. Inside, a woman in a wool cloak sits beside a low fire. Her face is calm, her eyes bright. She nods at the midwife and gestures for you both to sit. You've come for the warmth test, she says, her voice soft as steam. You glance around the room. No jars, no herbs, no strange instruments. Only blankets, fur, and silence. How does it work? You ask. She smiles faintly. The body knows before the mind does. We listen with our hands. The cloak of warmth. Test, as it was sometimes called in old records, was part superstition, part early observation. Midwives would place a hand or a strip of cloth over a woman's stomach or chest, feeling for subtle changes, heat, pulse, or the faint quickening that hinted at life beneath. It wasn't about guessing, it was about sensing. The woman before you gestures toward a thick wool cloak lying near the hearth. We use this, she says. Wool holds warmth better than skin. If the cloth grows hot quickly when placed over her belly, it means the child stirs within. If it stays cool, she lets the words trail off, as though even suggesting the alternative might bring bad luck. The midwife pulls the cloak closer, the fabric heavy with the scent of smoke and lanolin. It's an old trick, she whispers. Even the Romans tried something like it. The warmth of the womb, they said, mirrors the fire of creation itself. You sit quietly as the ritual begins. The woman lies back on a straw mattress, her hands folded over her chest. The midwife spreads the cloak across her body, tucking it gently under her sides. Now, she says, we wait. It's a waiting unlike the others. There's no laughter this time, no sharp smell or spectacle. Just the soft crackle of fire and the sound of slow breathing. The midwife closes her eyes, fingertips resting lightly on the cloth. The silence deepens until you swear you can hear the heartbeat of the room itself. After a few moments, she whispers, "Do you feel it?" You hesitate. "What should I feel?" "The change," she says. It starts in the cloth, like a spark that spreads. You lean closer. The wool is warm, But maybe that's just the fire. The midwife's expression is unreadable, her palm still, her brow furrowed in concentration. In this moment, the scene feels less like science and more like something spiritual. A prayer disguised as diagnosis. There's tenderness here, even reverence. After a long silence, the midwife removes the cloak and places the back of her hand against the woman's forehead. She nods. The warmth lingers. It is good. The woman smiles, relief softening her face. Then the spirits are kind. Historians still argue whether these warmth tests were truly meant to detect pregnancy, or if they served another purpose. Comfort, reassurance, ritual bonding. Some scholars suggest they were a way for midwives to claim authority, to show they could sense what men with scrolls could not. Whatever the truth, it's easy to see the appeal. No pain, no shame, just stillness and the quiet hope that something beneath your skin might already be changing. The midwife lifts the cloak toward you. "Try it," she says. You blink. "On me." Oh, she grins. "You won't catch a miracle, I promise. Just feel." You place your hands on the fabric. The warmth seeps slowly through, heavier than you expect, pulsing faintly, as if echoing your own heartbeat. For a fleeting second, you understand why this strange method endured. It's not about accuracy, it's about presence. Everything alive gives warmth, the midwife whispers, and everything hopeful listens for it. She sits back, letting out a long breath. The body is honest, even when words are not. Outside, snow begins to fall, soft and slow. You watch it gather on the window ledge, tiny white flakes melting against the glass. The midwife wraps the cloak carefully, as though it's sacred. "You'd be surprised," she says. "Sometimes this test tells the truth when all others fail. Once, a noblewoman from Winchester came to me after every alchemist in the city swore she wasn't pregnant. I felt her warmth rise like summer fire, and sure enough, she birthed twins that winter. You smile, so your cloak was wiser than the scholars." She chuckles. "Wool listens better than men." The woman by the fire laughs softly, covering her mouth. The sound is bright and human, a brief spark in the hush. As the laughter fades, the midwife grows thoughtful. "Still," she says, "there's danger in trusting warmth too much. Fever feels the same. Love too. Sometimes it lies." You nod. There's truth in that. A reminder that in a world without thermometers or test strips, everything blurred together. Heat could mean life, or sickness, or heartbreak. She gestures toward a small wooden chest near the wall. Inside are scraps of parchment filled with tiny drawings, circles, lines, and faint notes in Latin. "These," she explains, "are my records. Every test I've ever done. Some right, some wrong, but each one mattered to someone." You run your fingers over the ink. The handwriting is uneven, almost trembling. "What does this one say?" You ask, pointing at a note near the top. She leans closer, squinting. The cloak burned warm and true. The mother sang while she waited. It's oddly poetic. You imagine the woman who inspired those words, her hands folded under the same wool, her heartbeat mingling with the midwife's quiet faith. For a long time, no one speaks. The fire hums, the snow thickens, and the air feels heavy with history. Hundreds of women, hundreds of quiet tests, all stitched together by the fragile thread of belief. You look up. "Do you ever miss it?" you ask softly. When you guess wrong, the midwife smiles sadly. "I don't guess," she says. "I listen. Sometimes the body lies, but I still listen." Her words linger in the room like smoke. When she finally stands, her knees creak. "There's one more warmth test," she says, pulling a small copper mirror from her pocket. "They say if the mirror fogs with your breath, your womb is open. If not, it sleeps. But that's for another day." You laugh. "Another test, another mystery. Always," she says, wrapping the cloak over her shoulders. "But mysteries keep us alive. You step outside into the falling snow, the air crisp and biting. Behind you, the midwife waves once before disappearing into the dim light. Ahead, the path winds toward a chapel on a hill, its bells tolling faintly. You pull your cloak tighter. The midwife's voice echoes in your head. Heat tells truth, but sometimes it lies. And somewhere inside that chapel, you'll soon learn how truth and faith once tangled in holy water. The chapel on the hill looms out of the fog like something half remembered. A silhouette of faith carved against the morning. The bells toll once, twice, then fade into a long silence. You pull your cloak tighter and step inside. The smell of beeswax and cold stone fills the air. Candles flicker along the altar, their flames bending as though bowing to the wind. A priest in rough robes stands near a basin of holy water, his hands clasped tight, whispering to himself. When he turns, his eyes narrow, not with suspicion but curiosity. "You seek proof," he says softly. "Not just belief." You nod, unsure how he knows. He gestures toward the basin. This is the fifth test. The water's truth. It comes from older times than even the church admits. Long before baptism, water was the measure of life and purity. The way it reacts tells us what dwells beneath the skin. The Hockley water test, or aqua benedetta signum, was once a blend of theology and medicine. In parts of medieval Europe, midwives and priests alike believed that sanctified water could expose the hidden state of the body, illness, sin, or pregnancy. Some claimed it revealed the stirring of creation. The priest dips a small silver spoon into the basin and lifts a few drops, letting them fall onto the stone floor. The droplets sizzle faintly, though there's no fire. You realize it's just the echo, bouncing in the hollow chamber. He looks at you. In our village, when a woman believes she carries life, we test with prayer. The water is sprinkled on her belly while the choir hums. If the drops roll off without soaking in, she is said to bear a child. If they sink into the cloth, it means her womb sleeps. You glance at the water, clear and calm, and it works. He smiles faintly. Faith works. The water only listens. You follow him to a wooden bench where a young woman sits, her hands trembling in her lap. Her husband stands beside her, his expression torn between hope and fear. The priest dips his fingers into the basin and murmurs a prayer. In nomen vita, in nomen spiritus, in nomen amoris. He lets the water fall, droplet by droplet, onto her tunic. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the surface tension breaks, and the water beads up, refusing to sink in. The priest exhales softly. It is written. The woman gasps, tears forming. Her husband clasps her hand. You watch as relief floods their faces, real, raw, human. But you also see the danger of it. What if it had soaked in? What if faith, in its infinite certainty, had said no instead? The priest's eyes catch yours, as though he's read your thoughts. Skepticism is good, he says. Even holy water can lie. But we must give people something to hold on to. When the world is cruel, belief is the gentlest kind of medicine. He leads you toward a smaller alcove at the back of the chapel. There, a worn parchment hangs on the wall, written in Latin. Aqua viva discernit inter vita et vana. Living water distinguishes between life and emptiness. Do you believe that? You ask. He smiles. I believe water remembers. It carries whispers of what it touches. Skin, tears, wombs, deathbeds. Every drop has seen something we cannot. You run your fingers along the edge of the basin. The surface ripples faintly, catching the reflection of the stained glass above. A scene of the Virgin Mary with her hands open, palms glowing blue. Once, he says quietly, a noble sent for me. His wife was barren for years. When the holy water refused to sink into her dress, he built a shrine in gratitude. A year later, she birthed a son. The bishop called it a miracle. I called it coincidence touched by kindness. You nod. And when the water lies, he sighs. Then we blame the vessel, not the blessing. There's something tragic in his tone, an exhaustion born from years of comforting those who never found their miracle. He looks out toward the altar. You see, long before medicine found its voice, we priests spoke in symbols. Water, oil, salt, they were all ways of reading the body without cutting it open. Faith was our microscope. The words linger in the cool air. You realize this chapel isn't a house of power. It's a sanctuary for uncertainty. Every prayer here is half science, half hope. You kneel beside the basin, dipping your hand into the cold water. For a brief second, it feels alive, tingling, almost electric. Maybe that's just your nerves. Or maybe, as the priest said, water remembers. Would you like to try? He asks. You hesitate, then nod. He places your wet hand over your heart. The chill runs through you, startling, cleansing. Everything in this world, he says softly, returns to water or dust. And both tell the truth in their own time. The bells toll again, deeper now, as if the hill itself is breathing. The priest blesses the couple and watches them leave, his shoulders heavy yet serene. Before you go, he adds, there is a test older still, the test of silence. It waits beyond the forest, in the ruins where no one prays anymore. If you wish to understand belief without words, you'll find it there. You step out into the fog, the sound of dripping water echoing behind you. The chapel fades from sight as the path turns downward, toward a place where faith once whispered, and fell silent. The path down from the chapel snakes through meadows where the grass glitters with dew. Morning light stretches over the landscape, like silk being pulled across a table. You hear the soft, rhythmic hum of crickets, the distant bray of a mule, and somewhere far off, a lullaby. You follow the sound until it leads you to a small cottage, half buried in ivy. Smoke curls lazily from the chimney, carrying the sweet smell of chamomile and goat's milk. A midwife lives here, you're told. One who knows the moon milk test. Inside, the walls are lined with bottles, clear, cloudy, greenish, filled with herbs steeping in sunlight. Dried flowers hang from the rafters like upside down chandeliers. A woman in her 60s sits by the fire, stirring a pot of warm milk. Her hands are steady, but her eyes have seen storms. You're the traveler the priest mentioned, she says, without turning. Her voice is calm, but every word seems to weigh more than the last. You've come to see the truth through milk. You nod, half amused. Milk. She chuckles softly. Everything begins with milk. And sometimes that's where secrets show first. The moon milk test, she explains, was part superstition, part intuition. Midwives believed that a woman's milk, or even the milk she could draw before birth, carried signs of pregnancy. Some said its texture mirrored the moon's phases. Thin, like crescent light, meant no child. Thick and pearly meant conception. She ladles a spoonful into a small bowl and places it under a shaft of morning light. See that shimmer, she says. When it catches silver like moonlight, that's how we knew. You peer closer. The surface ripples faintly, forming soft, round rings. Historians still argue, she continues, whether this was medicine, magic, or just wishful thinking. But in my grandmother's day, every woman trusted it more than a doctor's word. She pulls out a faded parchment covered in small notes. Measurements, symbols, tiny moons drawn in ink. When the moon swelled full, women who suspected pregnancy were told to express a drop of milk, or even a drop of breast moisture. We'd leave it overnight in a copper dish beneath the moonlight. If it stayed creamy and smooth by dawn, the woman was with child. If it curdled or turned translucent, she wasn't. You smile faintly. Science hasn't exactly confirmed that one. She winks. Science didn't have to raise 10 children in a one-room cottage either. The pot begins to steam. The smell fills the air. Sweet, earthy, alive. She pours some into a wooden cup and hands it to you. "Taste," she says. "You'll understand." You sip carefully. It's warm and comforting, with a faint hint of herbs. "Now," she whispers, "imagine you're a woman of the 1300s, scared, uncertain, with no tests, no doctors, no guarantees. That first drop of milk you see, real or imagined, is hope you can taste." The thought lingers. She wipes her hands on her apron and points to a corner where a cradle sits empty, covered with a blue cloth. "I've seen miracles in that cradle," she says, and heartbreaks. Some women never produced milk at all, but swore they could feel the stirring inside. Others made milk for months, with no child to hold. Her eyes soften. The body lies sometimes, but it also mourns in its own language. You ask about the wet nurse's eye, the second part of the test. She nods knowingly. "Eye, the eye. They said a wet nurse could look at a woman and know. By the veins in her neck, the tint of her skin, the softness around her eyes. She'd say, 'Your milk hasn't come yet, but your blood already sings.' You can't help but be charmed by the poetry of it. Sounds like art more than medicine." She smiles. Maybe art was medicine. Maybe still is. Outside, the sun climbs higher, and she takes a wooden ladle outside. She pours a drop of the warm milk onto the grass. "An offering," she murmurs. "For the moon, for the mothers, for the lost ones." A small child's voice calls from behind the cottage. Her granddaughter, carrying a basket of herbs. The woman waves her over, her whole face lighting up. The air between them feels like a prayer. You realize then that this test wasn't just about pregnancy. It was about belief in the cycles. The moon, the body, the seasons. The milk was a mirror of nature, and nature was a mirror of the soul. As you prepare to leave, she presses a small vial into your palm. It's filled with cloudy white liquid, sealed with beeswax. "Take this," she says. "When you next see the moon full, leave it by your window. If it separates by morning, it means you've been thinking too much of the past. If it stays whole, your heart's at peace." You laugh softly, unsure if she's teasing. But when you step into the sunlight, the vial feels strangely warm against your skin. The path ahead winds through tall grass. Bees drift lazily between flowers, and the sky has turned the color of milk itself. You can still smell it, sweet and faint on your clothes. You think back to the woman's words. Everything begins with milk. And perhaps she's right. From mothers to myths, from gods to galaxies, everything starts with something that nourishes. Down the hill, a small stream glistens. You kneel beside it, letting the water run over your hands. It feels cooler than before, clearer too. The reflection in its surface catches your face, then shifts, just a ripple. But for a second, you swear you see another face beside yours. A woman's, smiling faintly, whispering something the water can't quite carry. You blink, and she's gone. The forest is quiet again. A gust of wind stirs the branches above, and you hear the faint echo of a lullaby, like the one that led you here. The moon milk fades from your thoughts, but not entirely. You sense its meaning will return soon enough, transformed, like all old things reborn. The forest opens to a clearing where the sunlight glints off something metallic. You pause, half expecting a relic, half expecting a trap. Instead, you find a mirror. It's old, almost impossibly old, framed in tarnished bronze, its surface warped by centuries of breath and weather. A few villagers linger nearby, murmuring prayers. One woman steps forward, her shawl pulled close around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the mirror as though it might breathe. This is the mirror test of modesty, whispered about in manuscripts and midwives' tales alike. It sounds poetic, but its origins are a tangle of superstition and early psychology. You edge closer, the damp earth soft beneath your boots. A man with a clerical hood, half healer, turns toward you. "Aye," he says, voice low. You've come to see how the mirror decides. He gestures for silence and begins his ritual. A sheet of polished metal, once part of a noble's armor, sits upright against a wooden frame. Around it, candles flicker, their flames bowing like courtiers before a throne. The woman steps forward. The monk sprinkles a few drops of oil on the mirror's surface, then waves a small branch of rosemary in slow circles. If she sees herself clearly, he murmurs, then her spirit is balanced and her body pure. But if the mirror clouds, if her reflection fades, then life grows within. You raise an eyebrow. So pregnancy makes you invisible. The monk half smiles. In a way. Reflection was once thought to be the soul's echo. A woman with new life was believed to share her reflection with another spirit. And the mirror, jealous of too many faces, would blur one away. You glance at the woman's reflection. The light dances, trembles. And for a moment, yes, her image seems softer, less defined. The onlookers gasp quietly. The monk nods solemnly. It is done. You feel a chill. It's not fear. It's fascination. A trick of light, perhaps, or a trick of belief. But in the stillness that follows, it's hard to tell the difference. Historians still argue whether this mirror test ever truly existed in formal medical practice, or whether it was an allegory, born from folk tales about mirrors stealing souls. But fragments of medieval texts do describe using reflective metals to read health, emotions, and pregnancy alike. Some even claim that the shine of a woman's eyes reflected differently if she carried a child, which may be one grain of truth beneath the myth. The monk tilts the mirror so it catches your face next. Look, he says. See how the eyes pulse with light? That's the sign of a seeker. You chuckle. Or just the reflection of your candle. He smirks. Oh, but that's what all skeptics say. Until the mirror shows them something they didn't expect. He steps aside, leaving you to stare. For a heartbeat, your reflection looks perfectly ordinary. Then something shifts. The edges soften, the background seems to fade, and the face staring back feels not entirely your own. The eyes look older, wiser, a little sadder. You blink, and the illusion breaks. The monk has already turned away, packing his herbs. It only works, he says, if you let it. The woman who took the test bows gratefully and leaves, whispering thanks. The others disperse, carrying stories home to their cottages. Another miracle, another secret. When you're alone, you run a finger along the mirror's edge. The surface is cold and smooth, but beneath the touch, you sense something, like static or memory. You imagine all the faces that have looked here before you. The laughter, the tears, the silent prayers no one dared voice aloud. In the distance, thunder rumbles. You lift your gaze to the horizon. A storm brews, and the clouds swirl like a curtain being drawn across the sky. You can almost see the moon hidden behind them, waiting its turn to judge again. The monk wraps the mirror in linen and secures it to a mule. We move from village to village, he says. Some call us charlatans, some call us saints. But the truth, he looks at you with a faint grin, were just reflections of what people need to see. As he disappears down the dirt road, you notice a second mirror propped against a tree stump, smaller, cracked, forgotten. You kneel and brush away the leaves. The crack runs straight through the center, splitting every reflection in two. You peer into it and see yourself divided. One half smiling, one half uncertain. And you think, maybe that's what this whole journey is, the endless attempt to reconcile belief and reality. The halves never quite align, but still, you keep looking. Rain begins to fall soft, hesitant, like the sky testing its own reflection. The drops spatter the cracked mirror, blurring your image until nothing remains but glimmering ripples. You lift it carefully and set it against a tree, leaving it to face the storm. The forest darkens around you, but the sound of rain feels almost kind, wrapping the world in hush. As you walk on, the scent of rosemary clings to your clothes. Behind you, a flash of lightning illuminates the mirror one last time, and for an instant, it shines like a portal, or perhaps just a memory refusing to fade. You don't look back, because sometimes, the less you see, the truer the vision. The rain eases into a drizzle by the time you reach the next village. Smoke rises from clay chimneys, curling into the grey air like tired sighs. The road narrows between mud huts, and everywhere you turn, the scent of garlic clings to the wind. Sharp, earthy, alive. You follow it to a small courtyard where a goat bleats impatiently, tied beside a table cluttered with bowls, herbs, and blood-stained cloth. A woman stands over it, broad-shouldered, her hair streaked with silver. Around her neck dangles a necklace of dried garlic bulbs. She glances up as you approach, her eyes gleaming like polished amber. "You must be the one asking questions," she says, her tone half amusement, half warning. "Well then, you've come at the right time. I'm just about to test a truth." You stop short. "Goat's blood and garlic." She grins. "Ah, so you've heard." The test of the vital vapors. Not for the faint of nose. The goat's blood and garlic test was one of the strangest folk medicine customs whispered through rural Europe between the 13th and 16th centuries. It mixed superstition, primitive biology, and good old-fashioned guesswork. Midwives like this one believed that the smell of garlic, or the reaction to goat's blood, could reveal a woman's hidden condition. She dips a cloth into a bowl of warm, red liquid. "Fresh from the morning," she explains. The goat didn't mind. They never do. It's just a few drops. You raise an eyebrow. "And this tells you if someone's pregnant." "In a way," she says. "The blood, when mixed with certain herbs, reacts to body heat and scent. We believed that a woman carrying life gives off a sweetness, something animals and herbs recognize before people do." You're not sure whether to be impressed or unsettled. She picks up a clove of garlic and crushes it between her palms. The scent hits you instantly. Pungent, fierce, almost aggressive. "If the scent fades quickly from her breath or her skin," she says, "that means her humors have changed. A new balance inside her body, new life stirring. But if the smell lingers, strong as ever, then the body is the same as before." You chuckle softly. "So garlic was your pregnancy test and your deodorant." She laughs, a warm, crackling sound. You'd be surprised how often one led to the other. She calls over a young woman, no older than 20, and gestures for her to sit. The girl's mother watches anxiously from the doorway. The midwife smears a faint line of the goat's blood mixture along the girl's wrist, and then presses a crushed garlic bulb beneath her nose. "Breathe deep," she instructs. The girl inhales and wrinkles her face. The midwife nods. "Good. Now we wait." A few minutes pass in silence, except for the soft bleating of the goat. Then, as the blood begins to dry, it turns a shade lighter, almost rose pink. The midwife exhales, satisfied. There it is. The warmth takes to it faster. "You'll be a mother by spring." The mother gasps, tears brimming. The girl sits motionless, caught between fear and wonder. You lean closer. "That's chemistry." The midwife shrugs. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just that the body tells its truth in colors we stopped looking for." She wipes her hands and points to a row of talismans hanging above the table. Each one, a small bundle of herbs wrapped with thread, contains bits of garlic, goat hair and salt. "These are for protection," she says. "Once we test, we guard." Pregnancy was never just biology. It was war against fever, hunger, spirits, and men's impatience. You can't help but smile at her bluntness. She notices and smirks. You laugh, but we midwives were part doctor, part witch, part priest. We had to be. The church said life began with divine spark. The men of science said it began with seed. But we. She taps her chest. We said it began with courage. There's something defiant in her voice, something that makes you understand why midwives were both feared and revered. They carried the weight of life on their shoulders and the blame for death when it came too soon. You watch as she gathers her bowls, rinsing them in rainwater. Historians still argue, she says, whether these tests ever worked. But they forget. We didn't care about accuracy. We cared about reassurance. A woman needed hope more than proof. That thought sits heavy in your chest. You glance at the goat, who chews calmly on straw. Do the animals ever get a say in all this? She snorts. They always know first. Goats, dogs, even chickens. They sense the change in scent, the shift in breath. When the body carries life, every creature around feels it. Science is only now catching up. You chuckle. So animals were the original doctors. She winks. And cheaper. The clouds shift, letting sunlight spill across the courtyard. The red stains on the table gleam gold for a heartbeat before fading again. The girl and her mother have already gone, their laughter trailing down the path. The midwife untees the garlic necklace and places it around your neck with surprising gentleness. For the road, she says, keeps bad humors away, and worse men. You grin. Can't argue with that kind of science. She lifts her gaze toward the sky. Remember this, traveler. Blood and garlic, life and death. They dance together. Always have. You just have to know which one's leading. Her words follow you as you leave the village, the air now thick with the smell of herbs and rain. The path ahead winds into hills draped in mist. Somewhere behind you, the goat bleats again, a strange, almost human sound. You glance back just in time to see the midwife raise her hand in farewell, her garlic necklace swinging like a small sun against her chest. You walk on, the charm still warm against your skin, thinking about how odd and yet deeply human all these tests are. Each one a reflection of the same question people have asked for centuries. Is life beginning? Or am I just hoping it is? The scent of garlic lingers long after the village fades. And you suspect that's exactly the point. The hills swallow the road ahead, rolling like soft waves of green and grey. By the time twilight settles, you've reached a place few dare to visit, an abandoned abbey perched on the edge of a silent forest. The air feels thicker here, weighted with moss and memory. This is where the dreams of the womb spirits were said to visit. You've heard of them whispered across villages. The belief that unseen beings would enter a woman's dreams to reveal whether she carried life, death, or nothing at all. Tonight you've come to see if the stories still breathe. You push open the heavy wooden door. It groans like a tired animal. Inside, the air is cold and damp, thick with the smell of rain and wax. Candles flicker in niches carved into the walls, their flames bowing low as though paying respect to ghosts unseen. A woman sits cross-legged on the stone floor, her cloak dusted with ash, her eyes closed. When she speaks, her voice is neither young nor old. It floats between centuries. You seek the spirits, she says without opening her eyes. They come to those who listen, not those who speak. You hesitate. I'm listening. She smiles faintly. Good. Then the first lessons. Not every dream is yours. Some dreams borrow you. Her name, she tells you, is Sister Elandra, a dream seer who once served at this abbey when it still echoed with chants and incense. Long before alchemists and doctors took over, she and her sisters were known for interpreting visions, especially those that visited women uncertain of their condition. Dreams, she explains, were the oldest tests of all. Before herbs, before blood, before holy water, there was sleep. You kneel beside her, your breath misting in the cold air. She continues, her tone calm, almost hypnotic. When a woman dreamt of roots, she was told her womb was ready for life. When she dreamt of rivers, she was carrying. But if she dreamt of barren trees or empty cradles, the spirit of fertility had not yet touched her. You can almost see the scenes. She describes women waking before dawn, clutching their blankets, whispering their dreams to midwives, who translated them like oracles reading stars. Historians still argue whether these visions were mere coincidence, she says. But in those days, a dream was as real as daylight. And a woman's body spoke through symbols before science had words for it. You glance at the dark corners of the abbey. Did the dreams ever lie? Her eyes open at last, pale grey, almost silver. Dreams never lie, she says softly. People do. A gust of wind sweeps through the hall, scattering ashes across the floor. For a moment, it feels as if something unseen has brushed past you. Something curious, but not cruel. Alandra rises, her cloak whispering against the stone. You'll dream tonight, she says. Everyone who steps into this place does. Whether you remember or not depends on how much truth you can bear. She leads you to a narrow cot, draped in linen. You lie down, the fabric cool against your skin. The sound of the wind hums through the broken windows, blending with the faint drip of water from the roof. Close your eyes, she murmurs. Breathe slow. The spirits love patience. You obey. The air thickens, the candlelight flickers, and for a while, nothing happens. Then, faintly, the world begins to tilt. You're walking through a meadow under a full moon. The grass glows faintly silver. Ahead, a woman kneels by a pond, her reflection rippling in the water. When she turns, her face looks strangely familiar, soft, glowing, almost translucent. Why are you here? You ask. She tilts her head. To see what you carry. I carry nothing. Then you carry questions, she replies. They weigh more. She dips her hand into the water and lifts it. Drops falling like stars. In our time, we called them womb spirits. They were the souls waiting to be born, drifting like mist until someone dreamed of them. That's how we knew. A dream of the unborn meant a seed had taken root. You reach toward her, but your fingers touch only light. The scene fades into darkness. You wake to the sound of Sister Alandra's voice chanting softly in Latin. The candles have burned low, their flames barely alive. She looks at you and nods. They visited, didn't they? You sit up slowly? Maybe. It felt like someone was trying to remember me. She smiles, the kind of smile that has survived too much to ever fully fade. That's how they speak. Through memory, not words. She gathers her cloak, dreams of the bridges between what is and what wishes to be. Every woman who dreamed of the womb spirits believed she had been chosen. Sometimes, that belief itself was enough to make the body bloom. You pause, considering that, so faith became fertility. Faith is fertility, she says. Hope makes the soil rich. Outside, dawn begins to color the sky in soft pink and gold. The abbey walls seem warmer now, less haunted. You realize how much of medieval life was guided by this kind of gentle superstition. Not out of ignorance, but necessity. When medicine failed, imagination stepped in. Before you leave, Alandra presses a small charm into your hand, a bit of silver shaped like a crescent moon. Keep it, she says. It listens better than most men do. You laugh softly, but when you look back up, she's gone. The air feels lighter, as though the spirits themselves have drifted back into their quiet watch. You step outside. The sun crests the treetops, scattering the last threads of mist. The world smells of wet stone and renewal. For the first time in days, you don't feel like a traveler chasing the past. You feel like someone it has chosen to speak to. As you descend the hill, you glance at the charm in your palm. It gleams faintly, pulsing with warmth. You wonder how many women once clutched it while dreaming of new beginnings, and how many simply dreamed to feel alive again. The forest below hums with waking life, Birds stir do glitters, and a new day begins. And for just a moment, you almost believe that dreams do remember what reality forgets. By the time you leave the abbey behind, the morning air feels sharper, cutting through the haze of candle smoke, still clinging to your clothes. You follow a narrow dirt road lined with wild garlic and hawthorn until it opens into a sleepy village. Chickens wander the lanes, and smoke curls lazily from thatched chimneys. The sign outside the local tavern reads "The Mother's Mug," and, fittingly, this is where the next strange test for pregnancy once took place. Here, you're told, the people practice the owl and the urine test. It sounds simple enough, until you learn what it actually involved. In medieval folklore, a woman's urine was said to change when she conceived, carrying a unique sweetness. To prove it, women were instructed to mix their urine with oil. If it curdled or smelled foul, she wasn't pregnant. But if it remained clear and pleasant, well, congratulations. Someone might start knitting baby booties out of wool and wishful thinking. Inside the tavern, the air smells of yeast, wood, and old laughter. You take a seat at a heavy oak table, its surface polished by centuries of elbows. Behind the counter stands a broad, shouldered man with a belly like a barrel and a beard that could house a family of robins. He grins when you tell him why you're here. "Aye, the piss test," he says, wiping his hands on his apron. "That old wives' brew. My great-grandmother swore by it." He pours you a mug of frothy ale and sets it beside a small earthen pot. "The trick," he says, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "was to watch for the foam. If it stayed calm, life had begun. If it boiled or soared, best wait another moon." You can't help laughing. So, people really believed that. Oh, I believed it, bet on it, and argued about it over breakfast. He chuckles. Historians still argue whether it ever worked. Some say it might have. A little. Certain hormonal changes could alter urine chemistry. But mostly it was faith mixed with ile and gossip. You swirl the drink absent-mindedly, the froth tracing lazy circles. It's funny, you think, how many of these medieval tests began in kitchens and taverns rather than in temples or universities. People turned everyday items, beer, bread, onions, into instruments of prophecy. A woman at the next table leans over. Her hair is streaked with silver, her eyes bright. "My nan said the owl spoke to the belly," she says. "If it stayed still, the baby was sleeping. If it fizzed, the baby kicked." You grin. "And what if the owl exploded?" She laughs so hard her mug sloshes. "Then you married a troublemaker." You sip the owl. It's rich, slightly bitter, with a taste of earth and oak. Somewhere between the jokes, though, a realization creeps in: these rituals weren't about proof. They were about comfort. About women finding ways to read their own bodies in a world that rarely let them speak. The tavern keeper nods toward the back room. "There's something else you should see," he says. "We keep a few relics from the old days. Might be worth your look." You follow him through a narrow archway into a small room lined with shelves. There, beneath layers of dust and cobweb, sits an assortment of oddities, cracked mugs, dried herbs, tiny woven dolls. But what catches your attention is a bundle of parchment bound with twine. The ink has faded, but the heading is still legible: Records of the Owl, Women Guild, Year of Our Lord 1362. He unrolls one of the pages. Inside are lists of names, dates, and results. Some are marked bright foam, others bitter scent. A few, chillingly, read false joy. The tavern keeper sighs. Sometimes they celebrated too soon. Miscarriages, stillbirths, back then, they blamed it on cursed owl or angry spirits. You trace the handwriting with your fingertip. And no one questioned it. Questioned I, but quietly. Medicine was a man's world, and all was a woman's. This was their science, their sanctuary. You think of Sister Alandra and her dream spirits, How faith once filled the gaps where reason feared to tread. Maybe this tavern wasn't just a pub. It was a laboratory wrapped in laughter and hope. He gestures toward the window, where sunlight spills across the floorboards. You'd be surprised how much truth hides in a lie told kindly. Later, you step outside. The village hums with life again. Smiths hammering, children chasing geese, women carrying pails of water. You wander to the edge of the market square, where an old woman sits under a faded awning, selling bunches of herbs and dried flowers. She greets you with a toothless smile. Looking for something to test the belly, she asks. You raise an eyebrow. Still doing that here? She chuckles. Not like the old days, but sometimes women come, quietly, late at night. They want to know before anyone else does. She shows you a bundle of sage and pennyroyal tied with string. This one's for courage, she says softly. Not everything that grows inside us is meant to stay. The words linger longer than you expect. Historians still argue whether those herbs had any true power. She continues, her voice low. But the women believed they did. And belief is a kind of medicine, isn't it? You nod, pocketing the sprig she offers. It smells sharp and earthy, like something half remembered. The road out of the village winds through meadows heavy with wildflowers. As you walk, you think about all the strange rituals you've encountered. Urine and onions, dreams and all, stars and whispers. They all tell the same story. The ancient struggle to understand the body through symbols when science had no vocabulary for wonder. A flock of crows rises suddenly from the grass, their wings slicing through the light. You watch them scatter toward the horizon, thinking of all the women who once waited for signs, any signs, that life had begun within them. Some found hope in foam, others in prayer, others in a passing dream. And maybe that's the most human thing of all, to search for answers in whatever the world offers, no matter how strange or small. You take one last look at the tavern in the distance. The sound of laughter drifts faintly on the breeze. You smile, half amused, half reverent. Somewhere, in another time, a woman might be lifting her mug to the light, watching for foam, hoping it stays still, believing, if only for a heartbeat, that the all itself knows her secret. The sun dips lower, turning the fields gold. You keep walking. The sprig of sage in your pocket feels warm, almost alive. The road bends west, curling through a landscape of mist and memory. You've been walking since dawn, following stories the way others follow stars. The air carries a faint tang of salt now. The sea is near. And with it comes the next chapter of medieval pregnancy folklore, one that smells of tides, brine, and secrets whispered by the waves. A fisherman's village lies ahead, small and windswept, its cottages huddled like gulls against the rocks. Nets hang drying in the sun, and the air hums with gull cries and the crackle of fires. You step onto the shore just as a group of women gather around a wooden trough. They're laughing, chatting, but their eyes are fixed on something that looks suspiciously like frogs. "Ah, you're just in time," says one of them, a stout woman with arms browned by years of work. "We're doing the frog test today." You blink. "The what?" She gestures proudly at the trough. Old way to tell if the womb's been blessed. You catch a frog, feed it the woman's urine, and wait. If the frog starts swelling or gets lively, she's expecting. If not, well, maybe next season. You stare, torn between disbelief and fascination. "You're joking." She laughs. "You city folk always think so. But in the old days, it was serious business. The Egyptians started it long before we did. They used frogs, too. Medieval folk just added a little superstition and salt." You crouch down, peering into the trough. The frogs blink lazily, as if aware of your skepticism. One twitches. The women murmur excited. "See, a lively one." A younger girl giggles. "Mean someone's got a bun in the oven?" The older woman elbows her. "Hush now. Let the spirits work." You can't help but smile. Historians still argue whether frogs really reacted to pregnancy hormones. You say, quietly, but centuries later, scientists discovered they actually do. The so-called Hogben test. Back in the 1930s, it used frogs to detect human chorionic gonadotropin. Turns out, the ancients might have been onto something. She raises an eyebrow, clearly pleased. See, we weren't just witches and dreamers. We were observant. You nod. And maybe more scientific than anyone gave you credit for. The waves crash nearby, throwing up a fine mist that cools your skin. You watch as the women chant softly, their words half prayer, half lullaby. The frogs seem oddly serene, their tiny throats pulsing in rhythm with the sea. A fisherman passing by mutters, "Used to say the sea spirits favored fertile women." If the frog croaked at dawn, it was a blessing. If it stayed silent, the tide would turn against you. He shrugs, tossing his net over his shoulder. Old tales. But who can say what the sea knows? You follow him down to the pier, where the air smells of salt and kelp. The wooden boards creak underfoot. He tells you that centuries ago, women from the inland villages would travel here, just to take part in this test. They'd bring jars of urine wrapped in cloth, hand them to the frog keepers, and wait by the fire while their futures unfolded in croaks and bubbles. "The sea was our witness," he says. "A child born here was said to have salt in its blood, a wanderer's soul." The waves hiss against the rocks, and you can almost picture it. Flickering torches, the sound of frogs, the crash of water, and women clutching each other's hands, daring to hope. You find yourself oddly moved. It must have felt powerful, you murmur, to find answers in nature like that. He smiles faintly. When you've got no books, no doctors, no truth but your own, you make the world talk back. And sometimes it listens. Later, as dusk slides over the horizon, you sit by the bonfire with the village women. They share bread, salted fish, and stories. One of them, young, quiet, with sea glass eyes, leans close. "My grandmother said the frogs were just messengers," she whispers. The real test came in dreams. If a woman dreamt of water flowing inward, it meant a child was swimming toward her. If the tide flowed away, it meant the spirit had not yet chosen her. You glance toward the sea. It's calm now, dark as ink, its surface rippling like a slow breath. "And what happens if you dream of both?" you ask. She looks out at the waves, her expression unreadable. "Then the child will come, but not stay." The bonfire cracks. No one speaks for a moment. You realize how deep these beliefs ran, woven through grief, joy, and the desperate human need to make meaning out of the unknowable. When the moon rises, silvering the sand, the frogs begin to croak, soft, rhythmic, almost melodic. The women smile knowingly. The sea approves, one murmurs. You stand, brushing the sand from your hands. The air feels cleaner now, filled with the scent of brine and firewood. Before you leave, the older woman offers you a small shell, smooth and white as bone. "For luck," she says, "and for listening." You tuck it into your pocket beside the silver moon charm and the sprig of sage. Your collection of medieval magic grows stranger, and somehow more human. As you walk away, you can still hear the frogs behind you, their croaks fading into the rhythm of the tide. You think about how every test you've seen so far, onions, dreams, isle, and now frogs, blends fear with hope, ritual with reason. Science would come later, cold and exact. But this was something softer. The path up the hill is steep, the stars spilling across the sky like scattered salt. You stop halfway to catch your breath and glance back. The village glows faintly, a cluster of lanterns trembling in the dark. You whisper to no one in particular. Maybe the sea does remember. And in that quiet moment, as a breeze rolls up from the waves, carrying the scent of salt and possibility, It almost feels like it answers back. By the next morning, the wind has shifted again, off the sea and toward the inland hills, carrying with it the scent of rain and sheep wool. You follow an old cobbled path lined with heather until the land opens into a broad plain scattered with stone huts. Here the air feels different, colder, lonelier, as if the sky itself is holding its breath. At the edge of this moor, you find a crumbling stone house where a single candle burns behind a warped window. An old sign creaks in the wind, midwife to the moors, Mistress Olwith, womb reader and healer. You push open the crooked door and step inside. The room smells of herbs, smoke, and something faintly metallic. Iron, perhaps, or blood long since washed away. Shelves sag under jars of dried plants, bottles of cloudy liquid, and bundles of twine. In the center stands a woman with hair white as bone, stirring a small pot over the fire. "Come to test the belly?" she asks, not looking up. Her voice is sharp, brisk, like the snap of kindling. You shake your head. "I'm here to understand how it was done." Her eyes flick to you, pale and piercing. "Understanding's a dangerous craving," she mutters. "Curiosity's made more ghosts than sickness ever did." She sets her spoon aside and gestures for you to sit. "You want the truth about how we tested for life before men in robes called it science. Sit then and listen. But don't expect it to smell like roses." You sit. The stool creaks under your weight. She begins slowly, almost tenderly. "Some of us used onions or owl. Others prayed or dreamed. But here on the moors, we listened to the pulse of the womb." She takes your hand suddenly, pressing 2 fingers to your wrist. You feel that? That rhythm under the skin. Every healer had their own way to read it. A normal pulse beats steady, earthbound. But a woman carrying new life beats differently. Quicker, lighter, like a bird trying to escape. Her fingers are surprisingly warm. Historians still argue whether we could truly feel it. Maybe not. But we believed we could. And that belief changed the way we touched the living. You can almost imagine it candlelit rooms, women sitting quietly as midwives pressed fingers to their veins, reading fate like a poem beneath the skin. Olwith releases your hand. There were other signs too. The eyes, for one. They said a pregnant woman's eyes grew glossy, as if she was already seeing 2 worlds at once, the one she lived in and the one forming inside her. She chuckles softly. And then there was the womb whisper test. You tilt your head. "That sounds ominous." "Oh, it was," she says, grinning toothlessly. You take a copper funnel, one end against the belly, the other to your ear, and whisper a question. "Are you there, little soul?" If you heard a faint sound, even the smallest murmur, the womb had answered. Some claimed it was the blood's pulse. Others said it was the spirit of the unborn answering back. You shiver, partly from the draft, partly from the intimacy of it all. "And did it ever work?" she shrugs. "Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But it gave comfort, and comfort's worth more than certainty." Outside, thunder rolls low and distant. Olwith throws another handful of herbs into the fire, and the air fills with a sweet, resinous smoke. "We also used metal," she adds after a pause. "Silver, mostly. The mirror of mercy, we called it. You'd polish a coin till it shone like water, then place it under the tongue before dawn. If the metal turned black by sunrise, the woman carried a soul. If not, the coin stayed bright, and the womb was silent." You blink. "So even silver had a say in it," she nods. "Everything had a say. The wind, the fire, the animals, even the stars. We lived in a world that talked back." You study her face in the flickering firelight. The wrinkles there look like maps, roots carved by years of watching life begin and end. "Did you ever see something unexplainable?" You ask quietly. Her eyes narrow. "Once." She leans back, voice low. "A woman came here in winter. Said she'd taken the mirror test. and the coin had turned black as soot. She swore she heard a voice whisper through the funnel, though her belly was still flat. I told her to rest and return in spring, but she never did. Her husband said she vanished into the snow, gone without a trace. And yet, months later, the same coin appeared in my fire one morning, melted and still warm. The flames crackle louder, as if agreeing. Historians don't believe such tales, she says with a shrug. But history's written by men who never birthed a thing but books. You can't help but smile at that. Fair point. She stands, her joints popping softly, and rummages through a chest. When she returns, she's holding a tarnished copper funnel and a coin, dull and warped with age. Take them, she says. You're the first to listen in years. You hesitate. Are you sure? She waves you off. I'm done listening. My ghosts have all said their piece. You take them carefully, the metal cool against your palms. Outside, rain begins to fall. Slow, deliberate drops that tap against the roof like soft footsteps. Orwith walks you to the door, her cloak drawn tight around her shoulders. Remember, she says, every test we made was really a prayer in disguise. We weren't looking for proof. We were asking the world to promise us something. You nod, stepping into the mist. And did it ever keep its promise? She smiles faintly. Sometimes. But that's enough, isn't it? You walk away as thunder growls again across the moor. Behind you, the candle in her window flickers once, then goes dark. The rain thickens, but you don't hurry. The path ahead gleams wet and silvery, reflecting brief flashes of lightning. You clutch the coin and funnel in your pocket, their weight strangely comforting. As you crest the next rise, the storm eases. The clouds tear open, revealing a pale sliver of moon. You pause, watching it emerge. Bright, calm, constant. Maybe that's what all these old tests were really about, trying to touch the moonlight in your own skin, to find proof that something unseen was quietly growing, waiting to be named. You breathe in the rain, soaked air, heavy with peat and promise, and continue toward the faint glow of another village in the distance. The next village you reach looks more like a scar than a settlement. Built into the edge of a quarry, with narrow lanes that twist downward into shadow. It's quiet here, unnervingly so. The houses lean into each other like wary drunks, and smoke curls from chimneys in thin, desperate threads. A single bell tolls somewhere far off, slow and hollow, marking the hour like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. You follow the sound until you come to a low stone building at the bottom of the hill. Above the door, a carving reads the Convent of Saint Amara, the silent midwives. You pause, brushing the damp from your sleeves, before stepping inside. The air is thick with candle smoke and lavender. Rows of women in grey habits move silently across the floor, tending to bundles of linen and clay bowls filled with water. You catch sight of a small crucifix hanging from each of their belts, shiny from being touched too often. A soft voice greets you. You walk softly for a stranger. You turn. A woman stands there, her face hidden beneath a linen veil. Only her eyes show, calm, sharp, knowing. I'm looking for the story of the silent midwives, you say. You've already found it, she replies. We are what remains. Her name is Sister Agnetha. She gestures for you to follow her down a dim corridor that smells faintly of herbs and beeswax. We are keepers of the water test, she says. The purest of all. No frogs, no owl, no dreams. Just water and faith. You raise an eyebrow. Water. She nods. A woman's body speaks through it. We called it the blessed float. She leads you into a small chamber. In the center sits a basin carved from marble, filled with clear water that shimmers in the candlelight. When a woman suspected new life, Agnetha explains, we took a drop of her urine and placed it on the surface. If it spread wide and clear, she was carrying. If it sank or clouded, she was not. The soul, we believed, would always choose light over depth. You lean closer. The reflection of your own face wavers on the surface, distorted, almost spectral. And you performed this here. For centuries, she says. The abbess before me said the water never lied, even when people did. Her voice softens. Historians still argue whether it was just superstition or a rudimentary form of chemistry, the way proteins react in liquid. But to us, it was sacred. Water remembered things. It spoke in ripples. You watch as she demonstrates, dipping her fingers into the basin and tracing a slow circle. The ripples shimmer outward, gentle as breath. The test was always done at dawn, she says, before the sun touched the horizon. The air was still. The light was kind. It was the hour when life listened best. There's something mesmerizing about the way she moves, each gesture slow and deliberate, as though she's conversing with the element itself. And if the result was unclear, you ask. Then we prayed, she says simply. Some questions weren't meant for answers. A faint hum fills the air, a low, melodic vibration. You realize the other nuns are chanting somewhere deeper in the convent, their voices rising and falling like the tide. Agnetha glances toward the sound. They sing for the unborn, she murmurs. For the souls who tried to come but could not stay. The water test wasn't just for beginnings, it was also for farewells. You feel a chill. Farewells, she nods. Sometimes, when a woman's belly grew still, we brought her here. She'd drop her tears into the basin, and we'd watch. If they vanished without a ripple, it meant the spirit had gone home. If they lingered, it meant hope still flickered. You swallow hard. That's heartbreakingly beautiful. She looks up at you with those calm eyes. Grief and faith share a language. You only have to listen long enough to hear it. The chant swells for a moment, echoing through the stone halls, then fades into silence. Agnetha rises. Come, she says softly. There's something else you should see. She leads you through another archway, into a small garden, enclosed by stone walls. At its center stands a shallow pond, surrounded by lilies. The moonlight touches it like silver breath. Here, she says. We cast the womb lights. You blink. The what? Small candles, she explains, pointing to the pond. Each woman lit one for her unborn child, whether she carried it, lost it, or only dreamed it. If the flame floated steady, it meant peace. If it flickered or drowned, the spirit was restless. You watch as she kneels, lighting a thin candle from a taper and setting it gently upon the water. It drifts slowly toward the center, glowing like a soft heartbeat. There, she whispers. That one's for the sisters who never had children, but carried the pain of others as their own. You sit beside her in silence. The pond reflects 1,000 tiny stars, candles from ages past, their wax long gone, but their memory still alive in the ripples. After a long pause, Agnetha says, they called us witches, sometimes. Said we meddled in the mysteries of the womb. But we never sought power. We sought understanding. The church may have blessed our work, but it was the women who sanctified it. With their trust, their stories, their tears. You nod slowly. And the convent still stands. For now, she says. But someday, the wind will take even these stones. Only the water will remember. You find yourself staring at the candle again, its flame impossibly steady despite the night breeze. Do you think, you ask quietly, the test ever really worked? Agnetha smiles beneath her veil. The truth. It worked every time it gave a woman hope. You can't argue with that. When you leave the convent, the moon is high and the air glows, faintly with mist. Behind you, the sound of chanting returns. Soft, distant, eternal. You walk down the hill, your reflection briefly flickering in puddles left by the rain. For a moment, the water ripples without wind, as though something unseen has brushed across its surface. Maybe the sisters were right. Maybe water does remember. You wake to the sound of gulls, distant, shrill, and oddly human in their cries. The smell of salt reaches you before the sea does, sharp and briny, filling your lungs as you walk along the muddy road that curls toward the coast. Morning light glints off wet cobblestones, and the world feels like it's just beginning to stir. The next story lies in a fishing town, or what's left of one. You can already see the bones of boats scattered along the shore, timbers warped and silvered by decades of wind. Beyond them, a line of cottages crouches low against the weather, their roofs thick with moss. You find an old woman sitting by a barrel, plucking feathers from a gull with deliberate care. She looks up when you pass, her face mapped with wrinkles that look more like tide lines than age. "You're late," she says, though you're certain you've never met. "Am I?" She grins, revealing a single golden tooth. The sea keeps her own clock. You'll learn that soon enough. Her name, you discover, is Mother Bridget. The locals call her the Brine wife. She's both midwife and fortune teller, the last of a long line of coastal healers who once practiced something the villagers whispered about: the salt cradle test. "It's older than the frog test," she says, motioning for you to sit. "Older than the barley test, even. The sea was our midwife before any saint or scholar." You glance around. The ocean spreads wide and grey, waves curling like muscle beneath a sky the colour of pewter. "Salt cradle," you repeat. Sounds uncomfortable. She laughs, a dry cackle. "Only if you didn't believe." From a cloth pouch, she pulls a handful of coarse sea salt and lets it trickle between her fingers. "This," she says, "was how we knew. A woman's urine mixed with seawater and salt. If it formed a thin crust overnight, like ice on a puddle, then she carried life. If it stayed liquid, the sea had said no." You lean in, fascinated. Any idea why it worked? Bridget shrugs. Historians still argue whether it was superstition or science. Some say the salt drew out certain chemicals from the body, what you now call hormones, but we knew it differently. We said the sea could sense a mother's heartbeat. She gestures toward a flat rock where a shallow bowl sits, rimmed with crystals. "That's where the test was done," she continues, "always by moonlight. The women would come after dark, hair unbound, barefoot on the sand. We'd gather around and sing while the tide came close enough to touch the bowl, but never take it. If it stayed dry till morning, that was a blessing." You imagine the scene, the sound of waves, the cold slap of wind, the moon a silver coin in the sky, and a group of women standing in quiet faith, their lives bound to the rhythm of the tide. "Seems peaceful," you murmur. "It was," Bridget says softly. "Until the men found out." Her expression hardens. "They thought we were calling on the old gods. Said our salt rituals were pagan tricks. The church sent a man to stop us. A priest from York, stern as iron and twice as heavy." You raise an eyebrow. "How'd that go?" As she smiles grimly. "He drowned before sunrise. Fell into the tide pool during his sermon. The sea took him. After that, they left us alone." You can't help but chuckle. Convenient. "Poetic," she corrects. "The sea keeps her own justice." A gull screams overhead, and she glances up. "Even now, I do the test sometimes," she admits. "For women who come quietly, afraid of doctors or gossip. They still want to know in the old way. They say it feels right." You look at the bowl again. "And does it still work?" She shrugs. "Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But when it does, they say they feel the sea inside them." You can't decide if that's comforting or terrifying. Bridget rises, bones creaking like the hull of a ship. "Come with me," she says. "There's more to see." She leads you down a narrow path to the beach. The sand is dark and glittering, like powdered glass. Tide pools shimmer between rocks, their surfaces dappled with sunlight. She kneels beside one and dips her fingers in, tracing a spiral on the water. This, she says, was called the Mother's Eye. We believed that if a woman stared into the pool at dawn and saw the reflection of a gull or a fish before her own, it meant new life would soon follow. You tilt your head. That sounds suspiciously like luck. She chuckles. Everything is luck. Until you name it faith. You glance at the rippling water. For a moment, the reflection seems to shift. Not your face, but something smaller, fleeting. A fish, maybe. Or a trick of light. Bridget watches you closely. You saw it, didn't you? You hesitate. I think so. She nods knowingly. The sea shows what it wants. It's not about proof. It's about permission. The wind picks up, whipping strands of her hair across her face. Once, she says, noblewoman came all the way from London for the salt cradle. Her doctors told her she could never bear children. She spent the night here, kneeling by the tide, singing to the water. In the morning, a thin crust of salt lay over the bowl. She left with hope, and 2 years later, she returned with twins. That's remarkable. You say softly. Coincidence. Bridget asks with a sly smile. Maybe. Or maybe the sea listens when no one else will. A long silence stretches between you, filled only by the rhythm of the surf. You notice that her hands tremble slightly as she gathers the bowl. Do you ever test for yourself? You ask. She shakes her head. No, the sea took my husband long ago, and with him, that part of me. But I still listen. Every tide carries whispers, old prayers, lost lullabies, the sighs of women waiting for news that never came. You glance out toward the horizon. The sun is sinking, turning the water to molten copper. Do you think, you ask quietly, people ever really knew what they were testing for? Was it life? Or reassurance? Bridget smiles faintly. What's the difference? You stand together in silence as the last light fades. The tide creeps closer, licking at the edges of the rocks. She sets the bowl back on its pedestal and lets the sea slowly fill it. When the water covers it completely, she says, the test is done. Not for pregnancy, for peace. The first wave washes over the rim, leaving behind a faint shimmer of salt crystals that glow in the dusk. You close your eyes and listen to the ocean breathe. Steady, eternal, like the pulse of the earth itself. When you open them again, Bridget is already walking away, her figure small against the vastness of the shore. You think you hear her humming. Something old, wordless, and impossibly soft. The gulls scream once more, and the world turns blue. Behind you, the bowl glistens in the moonlight, its salt surface forming delicate patterns that almost look like veins, like something living, still forming, still waiting to be born. The road turns inland again, climbing from the salted breath of the sea into a landscape of quiet woods. The air grows cool and green, heavy with pine and moss. Somewhere far off, a bell tolls, the kind used not for church but for warning. You follow the sound until you reach a small clearing surrounded by oak trees, their roots gripping the earth like old hands. Here stands a lonely timber cottage, half hidden by ivy. The sign above the door is barely legible Herb, wife of the hollow. You push the door open, and a chime rings softly. Inside, it smells of rosemary, damp parchment, and something faintly metallic, iron, perhaps. An elderly man looks up from a worktable scattered with dried herbs and glass jars. You've come far, he says, voice low and grainy. Not many seek the last of the iron tests. You blink. Iron test. He nods, setting down a small hammer. A strange thing, born from alchemy and desperation. They said it could tell not only if a woman was pregnant, but whether the child would be born strong. He introduces himself as Master Corin, once an apothecary in York. His beard is white, his eyes sharp and bright. In my youth, he says, We mixed blood and iron shavings in a cup of wine. If the iron turned black, life stirred within. If it stayed bright, the womb was silent. You frown, and it worked. He chuckles. Historians still argue whether it was science or imagination. But perhaps that's not the point. In those days, every test was a conversation with mystery. Iron, after all, was thought to hold the soul's memory. Rust was the mark of corruption, but also of transformation. He shows you an old ledger filled with sketches, vials, symbols, faint notes written in Latin. One page depicts a circle of women holding iron nails above their heads, sunlight glinting off each one. That, Corin says, was called the nail circle. If a woman's nail rusted overnight, after being soaked in her urine, it meant she carried a child of courage. If it stayed clean, the child would be gentle, or none at all. You raise an eyebrow. So basically, medieval gender reveal parties. He laughs, wheezing. Minus the fireworks, and with considerably more rust. You wander the room, running a finger over jars labelled Angelica, mugwort, vervain. Did you believe it? You ask. Corin hesitates. Belief, he says slowly, is what keeps the world from falling apart. The tests gave women something to hold on to when knowledge couldn't help them. Maybe the rust didn't tell the truth, but it gave them the courage to wait. He pours a cup of spiced wine and hands it to you. They came to me in secret, you know. Wives of soldiers, widows, girls too young to know what was happening inside them. They wanted certainty. The test never gave certainty, but it gave them stories. Stories. He nods. Every mark, every reaction became a sign. A blessing, a warning, a hope. Science came later. Faith came first. You take a sip of the wine. It tastes of cloves and iron. He continues, voice soft. Sometimes the iron test was done beside the hearth, sometimes in a field at dawn. Once, even in the ruins of an old abbey, I remember one woman, Marjorie, her name was, who held the cup in her hands all night, whispering to it as though it could hear. When morning came, the iron had blackened. She cried with joy. And, you ask quietly, she lost the child 2 months later, he says, not unkindly. But she said those 2 months were the happiest of her life. For her, the test had already worked. You both fall silent for a while. The fire crackling in the hearth. Maybe. You say after a moment, that's what all these tests were really about. Not knowing. Hoping. Corin nods slowly. Hope is a strange alchemy. It turns superstition into comfort. He smiles faintly, gaze distant. And perhaps comfort is what kept the human race alive far longer than logic ever did. You stand, feeling the weight of all the stories you've gathered. Frog jars, barley sprouts, salt bowls, dream prophecies, and iron nails, all woven through centuries of yearning fear and wonder. Do people still come to you? You ask. Sometimes, he says. Not for testing. Just for listening. He gestures toward the window, where the woods glow with the last amber light of sunset. They come to remember that knowledge once had a heartbeat. That belief once sounded like a lullaby. Outside, the air hums with crickets. The scent of damp earth rises as you step into the twilight. The cottage door creaks shut behind you, and the forest seems to close around your thoughts. You walk a while, hearing your footsteps blend with the sighing of leaves. Every test, every ritual, begins to blur together. The barley in the moonlight. The frogs, the salt, the candles, the water. They were all questions whispered into the dark. And somehow, the dark always whispered back. You imagine a woman hundreds of years ago, crouched by her hearth, holding a bowl of water or salt or iron, eyes shining in the flicker of firelight. She doesn't have answers. She has faith. And for that moment, it's enough. Because belief, however strange, was the one medicine that never ran out. You keep walking until the forest thins and the stars appear, scattered like frost across the sky. A cool breeze brushes your cheek. It feels almost like a hand, gentle and old. Maybe it's time to rest. So now, as the night settles and the last echoes of those strange old tests fade, take a slow breath. You've wandered through centuries of whispered hopes. Barley sprouting on windowsills, frogs leaping in jars, candles drifting across ponds. Every sound, every superstition, every fragile ritual was someone's way of reaching for certainty in a world that offered none. Imagine them now. The midwives, the wives, the widows, each one leaning close to the flicker of her own faith. She isn't foolish. She's human. She's doing what people have always done, trying to listen to the body, to the earth, to something greater than herself. You can almost hear their voices if you listen hard enough. The hush of the convent, the rhythm of the tide, the soft clink of iron nails in a bowl. They're all part of the same lullaby, one that hums beneath history's noise. Let that sound guide you now. Let it soften the edges of the day. You've learned more tonight than any scholar's book could teach. That knowledge isn't just found in facts, but in the tender spaces where wonder survives. Close your eyes. Let the centuries fade. The air is cool, the world is quiet, and somewhere, water ripples in the dark. Still listening, still remembering sweet dreams.